Testing, 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the February Built Heritage meeting. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and we always have an interesting conversation. We never quite know what's going to happen. That's one of the fun parts of it. So I'll call the meeting to order. Any declarations of interest? None. Confirmation of minutes from the 16th of January. Good? Good, thank you. Carried. And then in communications, we have a couple of things. Celebrate Ottawa Heritage Day is next week, and it's right here at City Hall from 11:30 to 2. I'm sure the mayor will be speaking. He usually does around close to noon, we could figure that out. But it's a great showcase of heritage in the City of Ottawa. And then we also have a local heritage conference in Cornwall from May 23rd to 25th, and that's for your interest. We don't have any funding, just so you know, for any of us to go, but some of you may wish to go because it's so close in Cornwall. And again, it's the Ontario Heritage Conference. So right to before we go to the two items we have before us today, I wanted to let you know, because you're probably wondering why we don't have the Bradley building in Stittsville on the agenda. If you remember, it was on the last agenda. We moved deferral, and we were going to have another expert go out and make comment, because the report came back and said from their consultant said that, well, you could do either or. So we wanted to have further information on that, and so we don't. And also, if you recall, Ms. Enta drafted an agreement with the owner to punt it out till the end of April before we had to have a decision. So this is about doing our due diligence, and this is from Ms. Enta, as the proponent has agreed to an extension under the Ontario Heritage Act to allow for further information to be presented to the committee, and as we are within the new time frame for consideration, the report will come back to committee on March the 3rd to allow for a response from a third-party engineer. And also, so you know, this would not be going to council until the end of March anyways. March the 26th, I believe it is. Okay, so our first item up, we're going to hold it. It is the application to alter 106 to 116 Spark Street and 111 to 113 Queen Street, located in the Spark Street Heritage Conservation District and designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have Mr. Jeans who's going to speak to that, and we're going to have a little bit of a presentation as well. It's the second time we've had it before us, and it's an exciting application. The second item that we have is the designation of 478 Albert Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This is one where we are recommending the council issue a notice of intention to designate 478 Albert Street. And again, we have Mr. Jeans here to speak on that one as well. And so without further ado, let's go back to the first one, the Sparks and Queen, and our presentation.
As the chair said, this was in front of the committee in the autumn, and there was at the time there was an emerging issue about the conservation methods proposed, and the applicant was moving towards a different way of preserving the elements of Spark Street, and so eventually the applicant withdrew that initial application that you had seen and resubmitted an application in early January, and that's what's in front of you today. The change to before we start, the major change to the applicant or to the application is that originally there had been it had been thought that the front facade would be preserved in situ, and the building, the new building, tied in and constructed behind. But analysis had revealed that it was doubtful that the building would be able to, the front facade would be able to stand during the construction process. And so what we have in front of us today is an application to dismantle the wall, take out the doors and windows and various elements, restore them, build a new wall, and insert the doors and windows into the new wall. Other than that, the project will be the same as the application that was in front of the committee in the autumn. So I'll just quickly go through. It's on the Sparks Street Mall, a through lot that runs between Sparks and Queen Street, just to the west of Metcalfe. This is the building today, current conditions. There's a hoarding around it. The application will involve, as I said, the removal of the doors and windows. Where's the mouse? Oh, there it is. Oh, that's this mouse. The removal of, technology is getting to me, the removal of the doors and windows and the reinsertion and the demolition of this building. This is the back. The new building will go right through to Queen Street. It is in the Sparks Street Heritage Conservation District, designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act, and requires City Council approval. The application is to demolish the 60s Bank building at 106, to demolish the front facade and entire building of 108-116 Sparks Street, remove and restore the wooden and metal elements and install them into a new replica wall, and to construct a new building which is 6 stories in one section, rising to 18 at Queen Street. That's a typo. It should be Queen Street. So there is the site. This is the Sparks Street side and the Queen Street side, and so the new facade will be incorporated into this portion of the building. Elevations show this is the restored, the new wall with the restored elements in it. This is the replacement building for the 1960s bank building that is being demolished, and this is the 18-story tower that faces Queen Street. Again, here is an artist rendering. We've had trouble with renderings in the past, but so just imagine that this is actually what the building looks like, but maybe not the flowers. So just it's more to show you how it will look when it's put back together. Plus, this pediment has not been there for a number of years, and the new pediment is based on historical photographs, and it will be reinstated. Minor variances under the zoning bylaw were needed to build the pediment, but it has obtained all those variances. I think we can go back to the site plan. So here is Sparks Street, and so one of the doors, then, yes. The architect is also here for more detailed questions. So this is, there was extensive analysis done of the building and the methods of taking it apart to restore it and then to reinstall the elements into the front facade. It is a very thorough document, and it's in your report, but I just wanted to highlight in this slide the elements that were being removed for restoration. They'll all be taken to a shop and individually marked and restored with the up-to-date technique. So there'll be, it's a very thorough job of removing them to reinstate them. Again, you can see the reinstated pediment there. Here, notice it's not there, so that will go back. So this is the rear facade of the Sparks building, and because there's a change of grade between Sparks and Queen Street, there are stairs here, and this is the courtyard in the middle. It is roughly a C-shaped building with the lower sections facing Sparks and the higher section facing Queen Street. The use is to retail at grade on Sparks, and then hotel and condominiums above.
Where is the accessibility ramp then? Because that seems to be quite a drop in the grade. Is that over there towards the, to the left?
The stairs are near Metcalf, and the building to the left is the Queen Street building, and there's an entrance at grade. Again, this is the Queen Street facade, so you can see there's the entrance at grade, and then the entrance to the courtyard is there, and the parking is there. Queen Street facade again, so there's the stairs. Queen Street facade again, and how it fits. As you know, there are height restrictions in the downtown core to preserve views of the Parliament buildings and the Peace Tower, and this complies with all of those view planes and restrictions. So the recommendation is to approve the demolition of the front facade, approve its reconstruction with the reinsertion of the insertion of the new elements, the construction of the 6-story mixed-use building, and the link from Spark Street to Queen Street, and the new 18-story building on Queen Street. And to issue the heritage permit and to delegate authority for minor design changes to PGM. So in the Spark Street, the guidelines say that new development should follow the cues of neighboring buildings and streets, and the project complies because the Spark Street buildings, the new one and the old one, will be built to the lot line as other commercial buildings are. The rhythm of the historic storefronts along the street will be recreated, and the existing facade composition will also be recreated. And it further complies because the building is compatible in terms of height and design. The heritage facade will be enhanced, and the taller section will be physically removed from the lower scale streetscape of Spark Street and is separated by a link. There was a cultural heritage impact statement that was initially conducted for the first project and updated to reflect this project with the reassembled the reassembly of the elements into the front facade, and the conclusion was that the Ashcroft Homes project respects Spark Street's surviving building groupings, protects the visible diversity of the area, reestablishes commercial vitality, increases pedestrian movement, and inserts a compatible new frontage on Spark Street. I should add at this point that this new conservation approach has been to the NCC and has received the approval of the NCC, and we have a signed letter that supporting and acknowledging that the conservation method will be different, and that was what we were waiting for, was indication that the NCC supported this. Consultation, Heritage Ottawa was notified of the application, neighbors within 30 meters of the property, and Centretown Citizens Community Association was notified of the application. In light of all this evidence and our analysis, the department supports the application because it meets the standards and guidelines, it meets the Heritage Conservation District guidelines, results in the restoration of an historic store, or elements of an historic storefront. The low-rise infill will not be visible, and the taller building is located to the rear. Whoops.
Go ahead, Councillor Moffat.
My question isn't really relevant to the application. Just a quick, when reading the cultural heritage impact statement, there's a picture of the building that speaks to the windows were changed in 1897. Do you know why? Is there any indication why? I mean, the building before was quite attractive, and it's interesting to see why the windows were replaced with the three, large.
It's very interesting to look at the progress of this building from its initial construction through to the 1920s, because there were a number of building programs that really changed its character, and I think that just reflects the aspirations of the owners at the time, that they, it switched uses to, it was started commercial, became a theater, and every time there was a new use, I think Spark Street was the main business street, and they wanted to continue to have a contemporary and modern building that shows that they were progressive, so they kept renewing it according to what was in fashion at the time.
Right. Yeah, no, I was just curious because the picture, the 1887 picture, is actually quite attractive, of the building, and it's funny because they left two windows, they didn't change two of them, they just changed the rest of them.
Yeah, it was a very interesting building program throughout history.
That's all.
It's a good question. We have, thanks, Sally, as we heard, Mr. Leahy is here, who is the architect, if we have questions. But first of all, I'm going to ask David Jeans to come forward. David, welcome. Going to talk about streetcars at all?
I will if you want, but first of all, I'm here speaking for myself, though of course I support the position of Heritage Ottawa on this, and Heritage Ottawa has generally raised the concern about maintenance and neglect of buildings like this, and this one was neglected for many years. I certainly support preserving all the parts of the facade that have been identified, particularly the windows and other elements, and maintaining the appearance of what I consider to be a very important retail presence on Spark Street. This building existed with storefronts on Spark Street for more than 130 years. That's, I think, longer than any other address on Spark Street in continuous retail operation. And it incubated many of Spark Street's most important businesses. It was a rental property, so people were in it for a certain number of years, in many cases before moving and building their own presences. And it's some of the most famous businesses on Spark Street. The very earliest, when the building was first opened, it was all dry goods establishments, and Charles Bryson had his store there. Now, Bryson Graham, his store at the corner of O'Connor and Sparks, which followed on after the 7 years that he spent at this address, became the most important and largest retail store in Centretown, and was very important. But he wasn't the only one. When the building was also occupied in one of the stores by Butterworth's Hardware, the Butterworth's brothers came from New Brunswick and established the largest and most important hardware business in Ottawa. They had their own foundry in the back on Queen Street. Enoch Butterworth founded the Ottawa Construction Association in 1889 when his store was in that building. And Butterworth's, very probably in their foundry, were the people who made all that metalwork that redecorated the outside of the building. I can't prove that, but it's likely because Butterworth's were in the building both before and after that reconstruction. As for Councillor Moffat's question about why that reconstruction, there was a massive fire on Spark Street which destroyed the entire retail block east of this building, and the reconstruction of 110 to 116 immediately followed that fire. So my guess is that the building was weakened by the fire, which started in the back of the immediately adjoining property and just swept down the block and destroyed a lot of important property. After the reconstruction, the first tenant were the Southern brothers, Wilson and Harry Southern, who chose that address to establish the Ottawa Citizen under Southern control and to grow it to be the most important paper in Ottawa and to have the largest classified ads section in the country. That was done in that building before they then proceeded to build their own dedicated Ottawa Citizen building a little farther down the street. E.R. Fisher was there for 30 years, including passing on the business to Bud Fisher before moving across the street into their own building in 1948, after which Jack Snow Jewelers was there. Jack Snow was the sponsor of some of Ottawa's most important events, the Dog Derby on the Rideau Canal, a huge event predating its use as a skateway, and the Panda Game, because in fact it was in the window of 112 Spark Street that the panda was displayed and ritually stolen each year by either University of Ottawa or Carleton, and Jack Snow was the sponsor of that and remained there until 1971. So it really is important. The other thing is that the upper floors weren't actually offices, they were factories. They were tailoring factories, fur trimming and hat factories. Henry Sims operated the manufacturing process in the whole of the upstairs part of that building. There were other operations over the years. It was also, during Jack Snow's time, the first home of the National Press Club in 1953. And that's even without looking at everything that revolved around the Centre Theatre, where the Centre, of course, was established there in 1915, but in 1943 it held the world premiere during the war of a propaganda movie, Corvette K-255, starring Randolph Scott. And Randolph Scott, the movie director, Kate Smith, and a whole host of other luminaries were there for the world premiere. So the building has a huge number of historical associations. And one thing I would like to see, and I think it was mentioned in one of the reports, was that when the facade is reinstated, there should also be a historic explanation of this building and the role that it played. It's right at the geographic heart of the Sparks Street commercial district between Bank and Elgin, and so from that point it's very important. I think that's all I wanted to say about it, except one thing from a construction point of view. My office, Transport Action, was right across the street above E.R. Fisher right up until 2005, so I was looking at this building all the time. As you mentioned, Chair, I am associated with the streetcar project, which is inspired by Holly Late, the owner of the property immediately across the street, the business across the street, the mustard shop and the Orange Cafe, where I spend a lot of time, so I'm very familiar with that building. I was in high school in Ottawa when the Sparks Street Mall was created. I did go to the Centre Theatre, though not too often, because I wasn't a big fan of Annette Funicello, and it was the beach party movies that were featured there at that time. So I think I've used up enough of your time. But when the building is taken down, I suspect also that the taking it down will reveal a lot of iron or steelwork inside that hasn't been mentioned, because the few studies that have been done of the interior have actually observed the existence of massive steel girders. And I think that they are there because the small amount of brickwork that's still there on the front of the building couldn't possibly support the structure that you see today. In fact, in 1896, I think it was converted into a steel frame building or wrought iron frames by insertion of a whole lot of structure that will be interesting as the building is taken down. I've said a lot, but thank you.
And it's all been very interesting. I remember the first time that this report came forward, it was the granddaughter or the niece of the gentleman who built the theater. And Sally did reach out to her to see if she wanted to come back today, but she said she was still doing some research. So I'm really very glad that you did, because that's exactly why we have a built heritage.
Yeah, that's Michelle Laboldis, and she has original stained glass windows from the Centre Theatre worked into the design of her living room out in Dunrobin, which are
nice.
Beautiful to look at.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Jeans? Thanks for coming out, and we'll see you on the next item.
Yeah.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Leahy? Other than to say good job, I wanted to thank Anne Menard from the NCC for coming out today. Thanks, Anne. This is good news. When Barry Podolsky's going like this is a really good sign. You know, this is really good news. It's really good news for the city. It's an important part of our history for sure, and it's about time that we had this kind of investment, I think, in the Sparks Street. I think that it could be a game changer for them. So it's exciting. We'll watch for the progress. And also bringing new life to it, too. Changing a parking lot into something that is quite attractive, and having that walk-through. I mean, I think that that's something that we should be striving for. I would have liked, even though with our crummy weather, if there was an ability to have it outdoors, but at least when you walk through, there is that kind of stairwell that is open. That gives, I think, movement and face to a downtown, and I like it where I see it in other cities. So thank you. So on the report, is that carried? Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so our next item is 478 Albert Street. It's the designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and we're being asked to recommend that Council issue a notice of intention to designate 478 Albert Street. Do you have a presentation on this? No, You have pictures?
We have a picture.
Could you put pictures up there? You know, like, a picture is 1,000 words with this one, for sure. Does anyone have any questions on this? We do have, Mr. Jeans, you might as well come back up and sit down again. Tell us a story about this one. I know you've done some research.
I don't know how to do you want to sit here? Oh, you've got, yeah, it's okay. Should we do the French one too? Oh.
Thank you again, Councillor. Again, Heritage Ottawa is supporting this designation, but I'm speaking personally. It should come up right. I've got a picture. You asked for a picture, but it may come up.
We had a picture.
Yeah, hang on. Is it?
Was your picture different than ours?
Yeah, no.
You don't want to use our picture?
No. It should work. Not sure. Maybe it'll come up. Maybe it won't.
If you'd like to, you can use our picture.
No, it's okay. I wanted to mention that, of course, Heritage Ottawa is going to be in the Family Day, the Heritage Day event next week. And on Wednesday, Heritage Ottawa has a lecture over at the Public Library about Old Ottawa South, which will be very interesting. And Julie Harris is presenting that. So. Anyway, I just wanted to say that the reason I'm here today, fully in support of this designation, and particularly to amplify a little bit more of the contextual value that centers around the first occupant, Thomas Seton Scott. I did a lecture for Heritage Ottawa in 2007 about Thomas Seton Scott, his life and his work, and have also given that lecture to the Friends of the Anglican Archives. Scott, I think, is an underrated architect. He was the first chief architect of Canada and of the Department of Public Works, and he mapped out how the department was to be created. He hired the 21 or so draftsmen and architects that created it, and he ran it for 10 years, during which the Second Empire style was firmly established as the Dominion style for Canadian architecture. Now, he isn't attributed personal responsibility for that, because the general feeling is that it would have happened anyway. The Second Empire was important in that period, but in fact, it's only during his tenure that it was a significant part of the federal building program. And this, you've been told in the report why this particular house is a gem of the Second Empire style. But there's a lot of other stuff that he has in Ottawa, some of which isn't mentioned in the report, like St. Bartholomew's Church in New Edinburgh, which he designed in 1868. The summer house behind the centre block of the Parliament Building, which is now the national, a recreation of it is the National Police Memorial. The Library of Parliament was completed under his supervision, because it wasn't done during the Thomas Fuller period on Parliament Hill. And of course, you've had the mention of the West Block Tower, of the Mackenzie Tower and the West Block of the Parliament Buildings, which was in fact his signature piece when he was admitted to the Royal Canadian Academy. And that's something that isn't mentioned here, because Scott was one of the 5 founding members of the management board of the Royal Canadian Academy, the National Gallery, and he remained in that role until his death in 1895. So he made a significant contribution to the creation of the National Gallery. He came to Canada as a railway architect. He was from the part of Britain where the contractors for the Grand Trunk Railway established their whole manufacturing works to build the Grand Trunk in the mid-1850s. He lived in Birkenhead, which was where they were located. There is an error in the Dictionary of Canadian Biography which says that he married the sister of the daughter of the locomotive manager for the Grand Trunk, and that's how he got his work with the Grand Trunk. In fact, he married his wife's brother was the locomotive manager, and his father-in-law was one of the most important railway contractors in British history, a partner of Thomas Brassey, William Mackenzie, who built railways all over and canals all over Britain and all over France. And Scott came from a long legacy of involvement with the railways and had a much bigger role with the Grand Trunk than is mentioned in the biography, where it only attributes 8 stations that he designed along the St. Lawrence River. But he also designed Bonaventure Station, the main station in Montreal, Toronto's Union Station of 1873, and Winnipeg's CPR Station of 1882, and many other things. He was an important church architect. The report does mention that he supervised the building of Christ Church Cathedral in Montreal when the original architect died, and that was obviously very good preparation for his being able to supervise the Gothic gem of the Library of Parliament, which would have been very hard to do with no experience in Gothic architecture. Where Scott got his learning, his grand tour of Europe in 1850, he's documented in sketchbooks of his at the Library and Archives Canada to have visited 10 cities of northern Italy and 6 in Germany, where he sketched or did watercolors of over 750 buildings or elements of buildings, which he used to guide his architectural work. He was a fabulously skilled artist, and that is not mentioned in any of the biographical information about him. So I think the house where he lived until his death is a very important memorial to him, and therefore that contextual part of the designation is I think very important, and I'd like more to be known about him and his work. It's curious that all later architects who headed up the Department of Public Works were actually personally credited with work done during their tenure. So, for example, Thomas Fuller is chief architect, and his son, Thomas Fuller, are credited with all kinds of buildings that were probably done by their subordinates. Whereas in Thomas Seton Scott's case, the assumption is made that it was only his talented subordinates who were responsible for these buildings, and he was merely an administrator, which I know not to be true, despite the fact that that's what the biography says. So I'm very glad to see this building being designated. I've known it for many years, and the area of Cathedral Hill and Ashburnham Hill are the location of a heritage walking tour, which Glenn Lockwood and I put together for Heritage Ottawa some years ago, which did include this building, even though it wasn't designated. So thank you very much, and please support this designation.
Thanks for coming out today, David. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Moffat had something interesting that you might be. I bet you don't even know this.
It's more on the last. Was actually my great-grandfather. You might have known. It was on Spark Street in 1913. My great-grandfather actually died in a car accident. He used to drive a bread truck. And I only thought about it today because we're dealing with Spark Street. We've dealt with it before, but for some reason I don't think about it very much. We don't know much about my family in terms of the Moffat side, but his son ended up moving out to live with his uncle out in the Mantic area, which is the farm that my dad was born on. But it's just kind of, I don't know much about it other than that, but it just kind of came up in my head.
So I'm wondering who was delivering bread for. Was Morris and Lamothe around then? I think that's a little bit early for them, wasn't it? Well, 1913. I think that's a little bit before Morris and Lamothe, but anyway. I probably know more about Morris and Lamothe than anybody else in the room, so I don't know why I threw it out there. Anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Jeans. Anyone else have any comments on this? I have a question. I was just saying that to Councillor Moffat. I found it remarkable how high the basement was, and I know that's one of the features you mentioned. But in that time, that must have been very different. I look at the house beside it, and it looks like it's quite close. I mean, when people didn't use a basement for what people nowadays would, with, as a rec room and stuff like that, it was more for storage. It probably didn't have any cement floors in it. Servants.
I think it's excellent.
Anyway, I'm just wondering if you have any intel on that, Sally.
It is a very high basement, Madam Chair.
But it is for that time.
They were not. I think maybe part of the style was to look tall. That's the mansard roof makes them look tall. I don't know why it had such a. Maybe they had a really big furnace. I don't know, but very excellent observation.
Yeah. Well, I made it. Does anyone in the room know? Because actually that, to me, I looked at it and I thought, wow, how do people live in those days, and why would that be significant? But I think that Vice Chair Podolsky said perhaps that's where the servants lived.
Yes.
Or
I
the
just-
kitchen could have been down there, you're right.
Yeah, the kitchen
Councillor
could have been
Hobbs.
down there, and says there are doors from outside, full-size doors. Yeah, so.
Good.
Clearly, it had some function. Sometimes Queen Anne Revival houses, which was the next style in terms of the 19th century styles, they had high basements.
Good. Well, thank you very much. So other than me, no other questions? So is that recommendation carried?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So any notices of motion? No? Inquiries? Almost feels like we haven't even had a meeting, that 2 hours early we're going to be closing down today. No other business, and so we're adjourned. Next meeting is March the 3rd. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Nice meeting, Madam Chair.
Thank you.